of the initial question, just based off of the initial questions that I saw for this alumni hour. So just my journey, and kind of from when I was at Waterloo to where I am today. And then just a 101 on sustainable investment, just for those that are not familiar with the area. And then discussing a few career paths in sustainable finance for you to consider. And then finally, just ending off with some lessons and tips that I can share from my experience in the industry. So starting off with my journey. So I started at Waterloo, and, I've always at the time had interest around sustainability. But fun fact, I started at Waterloo in the arts and business program, thinking I was going to major in drama, and then having business as a backup. But then I remember taking an elective, and it was an environmental elective. And I honestly can't tell you what that elective was, but it definitely pulled me into kind of more of that sustainability world. And I was really amazed that there was a program that can link both sustainability and business together. I just always sort of thought in high school it was like one or the other. So it's really great to see that. And then I transferred in my second year into environment and business. And there I, really learned sort of the foundations of sustainability and how do you bridge that across different industries, and also disciplines around, the legal system or finance and economics, and also just environmental sciences. So it gave me a really solid foundation across kind of variety of different subjects. I was able to build a community within the program. Everyone was very passionate about sustainability, but then also wanting to drive that change from sort of that internal business aspect. And, I think the co-op program is so great at Waterloo, and that is what I think really started my journey in finance and in corporate, having that experience through the co-op program. Although, some of my co-ops weren't sustainability related, like I worked for eHealth Ontario, so that was more sort of health, but I got to get a feel of what it's like to work in the government. I also worked for a non-for-profit, and I also worked at Waterloo in the environment faculty. So I sort of got a little bit of everything to help me decide, okay, which sort of segment of the business world I want to go into. And I was lucky enough to start at Marsh and McLennan. So Marsh and McLennan is the big parent company, and then within it, we have sort of 4 different practices. So I started at Marsh, which is mostly a professional services, insurance, and risk business. It is a Fortune 500 company, so it's a massive organization. And, we always say any sort of problem that a client can think of, there's someone within the business that knows the solution to it. So for me, I sort of took that very corporate path, starting in insurance, and there was an environmental risk practice that sort of looked at how do we finance environmental risk, either through transfer of risk, which is through insurance policies, so like property and liability policies for real estate buildings, for example. Or, risk retention, which is where you're building sort of a feasibility program and a captive. This is getting very technical, but it's basically you're funding your own risk. But to be able to do this, you need to have a good understanding of what your environmental risks are from a liability perspective, but also from a physical risks perspective, and then to be able to quantify that risk in terms of financial value. And Marsh also gave me a really good understanding of the various different sectors. So I worked across real estate, as I mentioned, but also mining, as well as utilities. So it was a really good exposure to kind of the big sectors in Canada that we have. And then after 4 years at Marsh, I sort of really wanted to move towards consulting that's more proactive and looking at more of a deep sort of sustainability lens. So at that time, I remember I had sort of a career crisis where I was like, okay, what are the different paths in sustainability that I could really take? I even considered sustainability law as well, and also non-for-profits. But ultimately, I sort of landed on sustainable finance because one, I had a mentor that was working within that. So she gave me a really good understanding of the work that she does. And she worked at Mercer, which is the organization I'm currently in. So she was a really good sort of guide for me to learn about sustainable finance. And at that time, there wasn't really that much of an industry. It was a very niche area of finance. So there wasn't that much resources out on the internet. So it was really good to have someone to help me sort of guide and mentor. And one thing that she really said about sustainable finance, and usually finance, I think, gets a bad rep for just looking at alpha and returns, and people that just want to make money and are greedy. But she was coming from it from a more of a green and sustainability lens, where we have an opportunity to actually move capital towards solutions, like big challenges that society is facing, like climate change, inequality, nature and biodiversity loss. So there's so many systemic issues that we really, from a financial perspective, need finance to help kind of provide those solutions. So that's where that's the big reason I kind of went down this path. I never thought I would be in finance. So this just goes to, the power of networking. And she was also a great supporter for me to actually transition into this world. So I moved from Marsh to Mercer. It was a bit of an easier sort of transition because it was moving from one company to another within sort of the umbrella of companies at Marsh and McLennan. But at that time, I also explored sort of outside Marsh and McLennan, spoke to the likes of EY, Deloitte, and they're all doing really great work. But I think one thing that I continuously stumbled upon was that they have really small teams. And at that time, no one had time to train. So everyone just wanted you to come in and hit the ground running. And with me coming from a risk financing background, well, that was helpful. I didn't have that sort of, investment and pure finance background. So I was lucky in the sense that I was able to move internally. And then, a few years working in the Toronto office at Mercer, I then moved to London, UK. And that was really driven by the fact that Europe and UK, are leading on sustainability. There's a lot of regulations that are providing support for sustainable finance. And there's also just a huge amount of talent and resources at network in Europe to leverage. So for me, it was a really great growth opportunity. So I moved, sorry, I heard, was there? Okay, I think it was just someone's mic. So yeah, for me, I moved to London in 2022, so just right when the pandemic was ending, so it was a good time to move. So I've been here ever since, but I do plan to move back home this summer, mainly driven by personal reasons. My husband, we got married last year, so he's based in Canada, and he's a physician, so it's just difficult to transfer. So anyway, I am really looking forward to coming back home and to be able to kind of apply the learnings that I've learned in Europe. The sustainable finance world in Canada is really fast evolving. We have the taxonomy that's underway, that's under draft. We have the ISSB standards. And so there's a lot happening. It's obviously not as far advanced as Europe, but I think there's a lot of things that we can learn from Europe and that we could apply in Canada. And I think we're moving towards sort of a positive direction as a country on these topics. So, I've sort of, you probably have my bio and introduction, but oftentimes, even when I talk to my family or friends and I tell them, oh yeah, I'm a sustainable investment, I'm a consultant, and like no one knows what that really means. So I was hoping this sort of slide could like help you break down what I do and is a bit more tangible. Because consulting is really quite broad in the sense what we do. So within my role in sustainable consulting, I work with institutional investors. So that's pension funds, endowments, foundations. that are looking to understand what are their ESG risks, so environmental, social, and governance risks, but also what are the opportunities, and then how can they integrate those opportunities in their investments. So whether that's looking at their investment policies, whether that's looking at their investment products and portfolio. So it's a wide range of activities. So that's sort of like 30% of my day-to-day. And obviously every day looks different, but this is sort of on average. And then Mercer also has a internal asset management practice. So we basically can manage assets on behalf of our clients. Again, institutional clients. So we manage pensions and variety of different investment portfolios. And so my role there is to support that portfolio management team in better integrating ESG across our own funds and our own investments. And 20% of my role is also around sort of thought leadership and research. So it's having a house view on different sustainability risks and opportunities. So, you know, what does net zero look like from a investment portfolio, for example? So looking at climate transition risks, but also the physical risks. So being able to, you know, run analysis on a portfolio to understand what are going to be the financial implications in 10 years and 20 years. So that's climate scenario modeling, or to be able to do bottom-up analysis on companies that you're holding within your portfolio to understand kind of what their risks are. You know, if we're looking at sort of asset managers, to understand how are they voting proxy votes, for example. So, you know, are they voting on specific issues like DEI? And, you know, those are the things that really change corporate strategy. So that's really important for us to look at. And then another 20% of my world is sort of around reporting and monitoring. You know, you cannot get away from that data and analytics piece. And it's actually quite crucial to be able to measure your impact and measure how are you actually doing from a sustainability perspective. I think in the past few years, the industry has gotten a lot of flack for, you know, greenwashing, essentially. So there's managers that are saying they're doing certain things, but they're actually not. So I think that monitoring and reporting and standardized reporting is becoming a really, really important piece of work. And so that's also part of the work that I do with clients, but then also internally because we manage assets as well. So to be able to develop those frameworks. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of what consulting can look like. It's a lot of different pieces, but I think consulting is really good to sort of expand your horizons, to work across different areas in sustainability, and it helps you kind of understand what you like, what you don't like before, you know, going into specific industry types of roles where you're just, you know, focused on either one client or you're focused on just sort of portfolio construction or whatnot. So now just delving into sort of, you know, sustainability, why it's important, and just providing you a bit more context around sustainable investment or sustainable finance. I'm going to use those terms interchangeably. But, you know, if you look at, I think, you know, you being in a an educational institution, you're well aware of how important environmental risks are in the short term, but also in the long term. And here's sort of a snapshot from a World Economic Forum report. So they do a survey every year of civil society. So they survey CEOs, they survey scientists, they survey academia to sort of understand what you know, civil society believes to be the key risks that are facing our society. So the latest report that came out this year, you know, in the next 2 years, like you can see sort of the second highest risk extreme weather events is up there. But then in the 10 years, you see environmental risks really, really dominate. So this is a report, you know, we share with our clients and sort of to build the case around why it is important to consider sustainability and environmental issues in investments, because sometimes it's not very clear, and you know, some investors are very short-term minded, but given that we're working with institutional investors who have a long time horizon, so pensions, you're not going to retire tomorrow. Pension plans are planning for the next 50 years. So they're really, really aware of these sort of environmental risks that can impact their investments and their assets. So I think I sort of touched on what is sustainable investment, but just to get a bit of engagement from you guys, is there anyone brave enough to try to define what I mean by what sustainable investment is? Anyone want to take a shot?
Folks can raise their hands, come off mic, whatever works.
Don't make me start picking.
I will try.
Okay, thank you.
My understanding is this is more about the portfolios that where your financial investment is put in. Like for example, the industries that it supports sustainable growth, like a green areas, a green technology, or green, like more sustainable agriculture, things like that. It's more, my understanding, it's more like the portfolio that you're investing in and how to optimize your portfolio so that make sure that they could be, I don't know, they could be like having sustainable development instead of having the greatest potential to be negatively impacted by the regulatory and environmental changes.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think it's, the way that we define it, and you sort of said it in those terms. It's so when we say sustainable investment, it's really a framework that we look through, and it is looking at important investment decisions and material non-financial issues. So that's how we define ESG. So on this slide at the bottom, you can see sort of different environmental issues, different social issues, and different governance issues that we consider when we're making an investment. And it's not necessarily, just looking at kind of a green investment. It's also your processes that you look through. So it's really an approach to apply ESG issues and broader systemic thinking from everything across your investment value chain. And it's also looking at stewardship, for example, which is a huge lever that investors try to pull to drive change. So that's stewardship means, engaging with companies. So every so often as an asset manager, if you're holding, 10% of Apple, for example, you have the right to voice your concerns about, Apple's labor practices, for example. So investors are constantly engaging with the companies that they're investing in, but also, if it's a public equities company, you also have voting rights as well. So as I mentioned, voting on specific ESG issues, you're getting a lot of shareholder proposals. A few years back, ExxonMobil, for example, their directors were voted against, and then more sustainability minded or climate scientists were put on the board at Exxon to drive that change. So that's part of stewardship activities. And ultimately, for traditional finance and sort of more conventional finance, it's looking at those material ESG risks. So it's not just looking at, every sort of trend that is happening and every sort of social issues. It's really about like, okay, this is my investment portfolio and what is going to materially impact the bottom line of the companies that I'm holding. And why is sustainable investment important? Why is this such a growing industry? It's really driven by these four sort of trends. So there's a lot of regulations around this that's rising. Well, in Europe, you have the sustainable financial disclosure rules. In the UK, you have similar, it's called SDR, which is sustainable disclosure finance, I think, is or rules, sorry, so SDR. And in Canada, you also have guidance coming from the central bank for financial institutions, for insurance companies to be able to assess their risks. And you also have disclosure requirements that are going to be placed on companies on the TSX around sort of the climate risks and opportunities and more broadly sustainability risks. So there is the regulatory driver, and then financial materiality and risk management. You know, I think before ESG and sustainability became a term or and a career option, investors always consider material issues in their investments. So sometimes those material issues are not on the financial statement. They can be just sort of off that. And so there's always that consideration for, you know, if you're a mining company, for example, what are the tailings impact on, you know, even just from an insurance perspective, if you look at that increases your cost of risk, your cost of capital, if you have a pollution incident, for example. And then reputation, I think there's a lot more awareness from consumers and a lot more demand from consumers if you're a company, you know, to be more sustainable, to think about, you know, your impact on the planet, on people. So that reputational piece, a lot of companies, you know, don't want to be caught out on something that's going to negatively impact their consumers. And then stakeholder management, you know, that includes everything from employees. There's a lot of data out there now where employees want to work for companies that are more sustainable, that are aligned to their values. And just in general, you know, even investors are pushing companies a lot as well on sustainability. So I think that stakeholder management piece is also really important and what's sort of driving this sustainability investment movement. And in terms of sort of the key trends within sustainable investment, so if we think about themes, and this should hopefully help you in understanding where investors are putting a lot of their money, where they're investing a lot of their capital. So, you know, climate transition is like the biggest thing that's been around for the last decade or so, where a lot of money is flowing. So whether that's in renewables or climate adaptation solutions, so climate transition and the world getting to net zero is a really, really big piece of what we do in sustainable finance, whether it's looking at different investment solutions or, you know, education, and sort of, yeah, driving that solutions piece in climate transition. And then the next one that's really growing is nature and biodiversity. And obviously, climate and nature are very much interlinked. If we fail nature, we essentially will not be able to reach net zero. We fail climate. So it's really important for us as investors to think about, you know, the impact that we have on nature. And also, you know, I think there's a stat about like 80%, I might be totally wrong on that, but a large portion of our economy is directly linked to nature. So the products that we have, the houses that we build, timber, and, you know, it's very clear that we need nature to be able to actually have an economy. So making sure that we're preserving nature and not, you know, impacting species loss is really critical. The challenge within this space has been really about, from a financial perspective, how do you create sort of solutions that are going to generate revenue? It's really hard to link revenue to like saving polar bears, quite frankly. So I think that's been one of the big challenges for the industry, but slowly we're trying to sort of figure out how do we make money, essentially. And then there's the circular economy. So that's, you know, going beyond just recycling. So that's making sure, you know, we have a circular way of thinking of how we design products, how we use products, how we get rid of products. And there's a lot of sort of investment opportunities as you're becoming more efficient in sort of the circular way of thinking. And then impact, and you can argue impact is across, you know, all of these themes, and that's really having a specific sustainability objective that you're driving towards. So when I talk about sustainable investment or ESG, that's sort of integration, and you're trying to be more sustainable, but there isn't necessarily an outcome or impact that you're trying to drive. So impact investing, we define quite distinctly from sustainable investment. But I think oftentimes people, you know, that are not familiar with the industry often think, so it's impact, your values driven. So two completely different things. and impact, sometimes, you may have to forego returns in order to be able to achieve your certain sustainability objectives. Whereas on the ESG integration side, or, traditional sustainable finance, you are not jeopardizing returns. So you are wanting your return, and also that sustainability sort of driver as well. And in terms of, like sort of more broader issues that we're trying to figure out within the industry, is the energy transition. So that's going to drive a lot of investment. And what is the role of fossil fuels? You often hear, there's a lot of campaigns, especially in universities, students, and I think other stakeholders as well want sort of investments or divestments out of fossil fuels from the endowments, and you get that pressure in pension funds as well. But realistically, we still need fossil fuels in order to sort of close the gap until we have more reliable renewable energy sources, for example. But there does need to be a peak to fossil fuels, and we do need to shift towards renewables. But how fast that shift happens is kind of, anyone's guess at this point. But there's sort of a huge discussion around that energy transition piece. But we do, on a positive note, like there is a lot of strong evidence of global policy and investor support for climate action, and it's already embedded. So, we are moving towards a cleaner global economy. And then another sort of trend is around climate transition, nature and biodiversity, and circular economy. So those themes that I talked about before, and how do they interlink, and how do we, think from a more holistic perspective rather than kind of having this just one lens at a time, which sometimes we can get into. Like if you're thinking about climate, some investors are just like, okay, I just need to get my carbon emissions down to zero. But then it's, what impact will that have on nature, right? Like if you're putting wind turbines everywhere, you are possibly destroying ecosystems as well. So you have to have kind of a broader lens to the way that you're thinking, and how do all these things connect. And then lastly, there's a lot around disclosures and standards, and the industry really, wants to get to a point where you have disclosures from companies similar to how we have financial disclosures, where you can compare apples to apples. Because at the moment, you have one company that's reporting on a completely different metric. It's, still within sort of climate, but they might be using a different denominator versus another company that's using a carbon intensity versus, carbon, like absolute carbon emissions. So to have standardized disclosures and reporting from companies will be really, really helpful for investors to make decisions, because at this time we are just sort of getting either proxy information or just different sort of metrics and data that's not helpful for us to be able to make those critical decisions on where the capital is. So I'll pause there before I go into the paths and sustainability. Any questions on sort of what I've just covered in terms of what is sustainable investment and why it's important? Okay.
I'll quickly ask one before
Yeah.
you go on, Levy. There was a question very closely related to what you've kind of already just covered. Actually, your last point there, talking about having those similar values for comparison so that investors can know where they're investing their money. Is that, do you think that there is a lack of standards when it comes to ESG? You were also talking about differences between where Canada is and where the UK is. If you could speak to that a little bit, that'd be great as well.
Yeah, no, thanks for reminding me of that question. Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I think, we have come a long way to standardizing the data. Yes, we're still not there where we're getting standard information from companies. But the CSRD, which is a European disclosures around climate, that comes into effect this year. So essentially next year, companies in Europe will need to start reporting against the CSRD. So that'll be really helpful. And the CSRD is based off of, TCFD recommendations that are like the benchmark and industry standard. And they've also worked with the ISSB to have that interoperability between the standards, because, you don't want to have European companies reporting a certain way and then North American companies reporting another. But at the moment, there is a separation, and they've tried to merge as much as possible. We'll see kind of where it goes, because I think that's one of the criticisms that is, with the European regulations, is that they're sort of, I think, driving ahead and doing what needs to be done, and the rest of the world is sort of following. But yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see kind of in the coming years how things get standardized. It might just be Europe, versus rest of the world. The rest of the world is moving towards ISSB standards. So that'll be around, there's the first standard, which is around kind of broader sustainability risks and issues. And then the second standard is around climate risks and opportunities in particular. So each country will adopt a version of that. So the Canadian Accounting Standards is now looking at those ISSB standards and making it more relevant for Canadian companies, whether that's looking at specific sectors or what is material, because obviously our economy is very resource-based. So yeah, we are starting to see a shift towards standardization, but unfortunately, yeah, we're just not there yet.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that, Libby. I appreciate that. I think that's this. There's a question in the chat, which I think goes into your next section from the title I saw. And the question is, speaking of standards, which certifications would you recommend to take if folks want to develop a career in sustainable investment?
Yeah, so I will definitely answer that. So I think, maybe I'll just tackle this before I go into the next slide.
Yeah.
So in terms of certifications, it depends on kind of what you're looking at and which sort of career path. So, oh, sorry, I just got a message. So to develop your sort of sustainability finance knowledge, the CFA have two courses or certifications at the moment. So there's one is around kind of broader ESG investing, and then another one is around climate investing, and that one is more technical.
Is that the certified financial analyst?
Yes.
Okay.
The CFA Institute. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
So I think those are good courses, especially if you don't have sort of a background in sustainable finance. I don't have either of those, but that's only because I started in this field in 2018, 2019 now. So at that time, there were actually no courses or certifications around sustainable finance. And having, kind of doing the work and learning on the job, I don't feel I need those certifications now, but definitely for someone that's starting out, those are two to consider. In terms of the accounting piece, I'm not too familiar if the ISSB have any sort of certifications or courses around that. I imagine they might launch it, but I know there's a lot of collaboration with the CPA because essentially it's going to be the accountants that are going to be doing a lot of these disclosures and assurance. So I imagine they may build that into the CPA. But yeah, to my knowledge, I'm not familiar with any sort of specific disclosure and reporting sort of certificates. More commonly, what I see is the CFA, those two courses that I mentioned.
That's awesome. Thanks, Libby.
Yeah, no worries. So in terms of different sort of career paths and where I see a lot of growth within sustainable finance. So, it's strategy consulting. So that's sort of where I am. So that's working with institutional investors around, their investment policies, around establishing their reporting frameworks, and also, establishing their stewardship, so their stakeholder engagement. So that's working across sort of all the different pieces. There's also a more focused area of growth, in portfolio management. So you see a lot of, like, for example, RBC, they have a sustainable global equity fund. So they have a portfolio management team for that. And then within that team, there's an ESG analyst. So the role of that ESG analyst is to look at the different ESG risks and opportunities that could impact the companies that they're holding in that portfolio. So it's a very focused role, but also it cuts across different industries because they're not just holding, oil companies or whatever it may be. They're holding across different sectors. So it's a really, really interesting area to work in, where you're actually looking at the companies that you're holding and taking a deeper dive to understand where those risks and opportunities lie. There's also, a lot of need for subject matter expertise. So sustainable finance, the people that are on my team come from a lot of different backgrounds. There's people that are coming from a traditional finance background, but there's a lot of people also coming from an environmental science background, for example, and like DEI or corporate strategy. So there's one thing that really stuck with me when I was at Waterloo and doing my undergrad degree was the importance of, being interdisciplinary in the way that we solve problems. And with sustainability, you're gonna need economists, you're gonna need engineers, you're gonna need, people in politics and policy, you need finance. So there's just such a overlap or I guess cross-section of ideas that are needed to be able to solve these major systemic problems. So I think, if you have expertise or interest in a specific area, really growing that is valuable. So, I know a lot of asset management firms right now are looking for AI specialists, for example, but then how do you build that from a sustainability perspective? So having a specific expertise around that. So there's a lot of sort of different areas that you can go down, or even just, from an engineering perspective, renewables, like that's a big, big sector. And for you to then come from, engineering background into finance is really, really valuable because you understand the technology, you understand the companies and the sector. That's really important for making those investments if you're going to work in infrastructure, for example. And then the data and disclosures piece, which we talked about a lot. So that's really around, doing reporting, whether it's on carbon footprinting. So I know Accenture, for example, have a whole practice where consultants are working with corporates to help them estimate their carbon footprint, for example, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. I know other consulting firms are doing the same. And also just, even moving beyond carbon, looking at sort of DEI metrics or looking at sort of the social impact side of things or assurance. A lot of regulations that are going to impose specific disclosure requirements will also require assurance. So, the big four will play a big role in that in terms of looking at sort of that sustainability data and making sure it's of high quality and integrity. So these are sort of like in the 4 areas that I'm seeing a lot of growth in. There's, of course, different sort of niches within that. And yeah, if you know of a specific area you want to talk about, happy to kind of answer any questions there. So this is my last slide. I'm just going to check for if there were any, okay, no questions in the chat.
Actually, Levy, what was the second course you mentioned? I just figured I'd drop the link to it in the chat for folks to check out as well.
Yeah, so the
CFA finance ones.
Yeah, I think it's called ESG investing. Is this the
Okay.
Yeah. Let me just search CFA ESG investing. So yeah, that at the moment they have 2 courses.
Awesome, thanks.
So yeah, just a few takeaways. I'm not, haven't been in the industry for 20 years, but in the few years that I have been, these are sort of the things that I carry with me. So, one thing is to always remain curious, resourceful, and creative. Like I know these are very like soft skills, but it helps a lot to be able to, kind of to connect ideas and to be sort of, think about, like, for example, I was in Amsterdam a few weeks ago, and so I went to McDonald's because I like to go to McDonald's in every country just to see what different things they have. But you know, there they don't have plastic lids, for example. Like they are using paper lids, and all of their cups are made of recyclable. So they don't have like an inner lining, which a lot of countries have, and then you're not able to recycle the cup. And just to be able to, and I just started like digging a bit more around that, and then, you know, like what companies are actually investing in this, and like, you know, where is the opportunity there? And I think just remaining curious around, like, there's so many things in just like our everyday life that that you can learn from, and think about, okay, like this is a trend. You know, like my sister, who is a lot younger than me, Gen Z, and I'm always, you know, trying to learn from her, like, okay, like, you know, what does this generation really care about? Like, what is, you know, their views on sustainability? And a lot of this, you know, can actually drive solutions. So like pensions, for example, like DC, defined contributions, that's where you're controlling your own pensions. So building funds for actually individuals, and looking at the preferences. So anyway, that's going too far, but in any case, I think just being curious, and also if you don't have the answer, know where to get it from. So I don't have all the answers, but I think being able to know who to go to, or, you know, where to go to is really, really helpful. You never want to come to work, you know, being like, oh, I don't know, like to your boss. It's like, okay, these are the things that I think might be, you know, helpful or a solution, and then you sort of work through that. To the second point, you know, I've talked a lot about this already, but, you know, having the ability to connect ideas. Everything in climate and nature, in finance, is related. Everything has impacts. You know, I'm sure you've heard of the concept of double materiality. So it's the impact that companies have on nature, or the planet, and also what impact the planet has on those companies. So it's being able to connect through, you know, economics, through politics, but also through sort of different industries and sectors. Essentially, you know, an impact here is going to have an outcome somewhere else. So to be able to connect that, and, you know, especially when we talk about climate, it is not just a regional problem, it is across the world. So we need to think about global thinking and global solutions. The third point, you know, this is maybe a bit more personal. I've always had really strong passion for sustainability, but being in this field has really, really challenged me in terms of, you know, passion is great, but you have to be pragmatic. It's about understanding what are the drivers behind each stakeholder that you're working with. I work with a lot of boards and a lot of investment committees. You know, everyone is coming from a different walk of life, a different way of thinking. And for me to impose my sort of views on decisions, it's just not going to work. Like I cannot just tell, you know, the board, be like, okay, climate change is, you know, it's burning the planet, and like you need to divest out of this sector. Like that's just not going to work. At the end of the day, a lot of these folks come from traditional backgrounds, so you have to be able to speak with evidence, with thoughtfulness and consideration, and, you know, there is no one solution. So divesting out of one sector is not going to solve the problem, because there will be someone else who comes in and picks up that investment that you've divested out of because you think it's not, you know, good for climate, for example. So I think just being pragmatic in the approach that you're taking is really valuable. And, you know, the fourth one is just, yeah, learn, if you're interested in this area, invest in learning about the fundamentals of finance. It's really, really key in terms of building your own integrity and credibility amongst the people that you're working with. So for example, right now I'm doing the CFA. I'm probably like, you know, one of the later people amongst my team that's doing it, but I'm on level 2 now. But for me, you know, I don't need it to do my job. And there's no sort of obligation from the firm for me to have it, but, you know, it's just for my own sort of, I guess, a challenge for me, because I don't come from a pure finance background, but it's also so helpful to be able to speak the same language as the people that I'm working with. I'm working with a lot of technical people in portfolio management, and finance. So that's been really helpful. And then, you know, how do I bring that sustainability lens where I'm really strong and fit that into sort of that puzzle? And then finally, it's really important to be able to demonstrate your knowledge and experience. So having that practical sort of experience is really important. So whether that's through co-op, through volunteering, a lot of the times sustainability teams are quite under-resourced and small within companies and investment firms. So often they're looking for people to just come in and, hit the ground running, like barely any training, and you sort of have to learn on the job. So to be able to come in with some sort of experience or expertise is really, really helpful to break into the industry. And also just being able to acknowledge what you're good at, and what you like, because I think, I got caught in this early on in my career where I'm like, yes, I want to be a portfolio manager and, be the one who makes the decisions on what companies we invest in. But working through, day to day and having exposure to that, I've realized that, like, I don't want to be a trader. I don't want to be like, it's just not within sort of my interest. While it would be great to have sort of that type of experience, I think for me, it's more important to be able to support investors in understanding what is important and then to be able to find those solutions rather than being so sort of siloed and in the weeds of like company to company, and you're looking at 10 companies and that's all the analysis that you're doing and it's very technical. So I think it's, just making sure you understand what you like and what you don't like, and you'll figure that out as you get more experience and through your co-ops and sort of whatever work that you do. So yeah, that's my last slide. I really appreciate everyone's attention to, I know that was a lot, so hopefully,
Yeah.
yeah, if you have any questions, do let me know. We have a few more minutes left, but I'm also, just available outside of this as well.
Yeah. And just because I haven't had the chance to ask you this, Lovey, do you have a few moments? Because I know some people, there's actually a few questions in the chat.
Yeah.
That we should probably go through because some folks probably have to like leave to classes and stuff. So we're just gonna like jump into them.
Of course.
There's one of the, if it's okay with everyone, we're just gonna start with the question that had the most likes because I think people are reading the questions, they're like, yes, that one. So there is a question here with 3 likes, and then I'll go to the question. Oh, actually, sorry. Gisha, you asked a question first, and then I'll go to the 3 like question, the last question. I think there was one more. So we'll start with that one. So the question is, do you get investors that are more transformative, outcomes oriented than ESG oriented? Like if they want to support the mainstreaming of certain set of practices, zero waste grocery deliveries plus local sourcing, kind of covering multi-system transformation or twin transitions.
Sorry, what question is that?
So that question is from, actually, I see that Gisha, you're still on the call.
okay.
If you wanted to expand on your question, up to you.
Yeah, so hi. So I did my master's in the UK and now I'm doing PhD in Canada, but kind of the same research on zero waste transitions. And there is an emerging, like, I think it's more theoretical at this point, but I'm not sure if in Europe it's already being applied, like transformative investing, which they differentiate from ESG investing. And we're looking at it like a more transformative outcomes based. For example, if you're looking at transforming like the way we do groceries, there will be new business practices around it. For example, if you want to support the mainstreaming of zero waste grocery deliveries, and in that niche they also care about local sourcing, so it's kind of like a set of multiple practices. So do you get that? Like, are investors starting to be interested in investing in that kind of like we want to establish a new alternative system than just like checking ESG opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, I would hope so, because that's like, I think that the ESG, the check boxing is way like, I can say for at least Europe, like that's old. Like no one, you cannot get away with just checkboxing things. And
Mm.
I think a lot of the regulation has focused, sort of around that greenwashing piece, which is the checkboxing. I think, investors are really thinking about structural changes and transition across different sectors. So like, when we talk about energy transition, or technology transition, is looking at across those sectors, everything from upstream to downstream, like how do we transform systems within the economy so that we're able to reach specific objectives. So it's decarbonization across all sectors, and of course there's going to be sectors that are hard to abate, like steel or cement, for example. So then, what are those alternatives that we need to think about? So it is a very sort of systematic thinking that we apply when we're looking at investments, because that checkbox is just, it's not cutting it anymore. And I think investors are very sophisticated and smart to like move beyond that, because we're already almost approaching 2030, and a lot of these companies and investors have set net zero targets. So it's I think it's really about that change in the economy, and not just like focusing on just like, oh yes, we invested in this company that is invested in renewables, for example. So it's really about transformative investments. And there's a great sort of paper that we wrote with the World Economic Forum on transformative investments like 2-3 years ago. That might be helpful, that you want to check out.
Yeah, great. Thanks. That's
Yeah, no worries.
great.
Thanks for your question, Gisha. Okay, next question is from Jennifer. What would you recommend for someone with an environmental science master's background, but doesn't have a lot of co-op or work experience in the related field? What's the best way to get your foot in the door? You already mentioned how having that experience, especially for small teams that are under resourced, is very essential. So what about for someone who doesn't have the work experience but has that educational background?
Yeah, so I think, a lot of, if you look at sort of the big asset management firms that have more capacity to hire more individuals within their sustainability teams, I think, they are welcoming a lot of master students and people that have that deep expertise. So I think, starting off with sort of major companies, that's where you can get your foot in the door and build a lot of experience. And I think just like volunteering as well, if there is an opportunity within, certain, or I know corporations don't do any sort of volunteering assignment, because then, the whole pay thing becomes an issue. But I think, just like, your conservation society, or I have a friend that volunteers at the London Zoo, for example, because she really wants to pivot into biodiversity and sort of be on the ground. So I think just having sort of tangible experience, world experience, is really helpful. But also just building sort of that more formal education is also really important. But I think, like, unfortunately, tangible experience is going to go a long way. And I know we often get into that whole like, well, I'm not getting the opportunity, how am I supposed to build experience issue? But I think, I think volunteering is a really good way, and just expanding your network, talking to different people as well. I think, you can never sort of oversell networking, and I can attest to that, just being able to switch into this industry when not having that experience.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. Thank you so much. It's already 11, so I want to go into the last question before we ask some more. There's a lovely thank you in there from Jennifer. So, okay. What is the minimum level of finance skill for a student in the sustainability background to get involved in this field? Some basic certificates. You already talked a little bit about the CFA courses that you mentioned. Any other certifications? I mean, you're doing your CFA. That's awesome. You talked about volunteerism. Any other thing people should have in their back pockets to break into this field?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say there's any sort of like minimum requirements. I think, well, most jobs, like, of course, require like an undergrad. And if it's in a certain specific area of sustainability, like for climate, for example, I think a master's is really valuable there as well. But I think in general, like, finance is surprisingly open to a lot of different backgrounds, because I think, you don't want to have groupthink is the biggest issue that you can have when trying to drive alpha. So I think it's having people with sort of different perspectives and different backgrounds. So yeah, I think there isn't necessarily a minimum requirement. I think you just have to be able to sort of demonstrate, your sort of expertise and why you're interested, and where you hope to sort of go and sort of build your career, and what's the driving factor. A lot of the sustainability teams, even within finance, are motivated by not just, the income that we get and our salaries. I think a lot of us are passionate about the work that we do and genuinely want to drive impact. So I think that should be sort of the ultimate motivator. And I think sometimes some people, might be like, oh, this is sort of the trend and where I can make a lot of money or whatnot. I think oftentimes, that doesn't lead to successful outcomes. So I think just genuinely understanding sort of what are your reasons and what are your drivers, and sort of targeting those specific kinds of roles is really helpful.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Louis. So those are the end of the questions that were in the chat. Lots of knowledge there, lots of transferable things that you can actually begin to implement right now, which I think is excellent, and some great resources that have been pointed to. I was quickly trying to Google the article that you were talking about, Lovey, but you said something and then I needed to write it down. So if you're able to share that, we'll make sure that folks get it as well so that they can read. And you mentioned networking, which I think is a very big one that can be difficult and overwhelming. I think we hear networking so often these days.
Yeah,
and,
I know.
and it's for a reason, right? It's for a very valid reason. It's such a helpful aspect of growing your career and building those connections that can get you to where you need to be.
Yeah, no, I know every sort of career conversation comes to networking, but honestly, I think it's just the way that you approach networking is important. The way that I've approached it is really to just learn from people and, not going with sort of any other motivation than to just learn about what they're doing. And, like, is that something that I want to do? And like, just asking like, how do I do that? Rather than, being like, oh, this person can get me a job or whatnot. Because I think that just adds pressure to the other person. So, and I genuinely think, this, the network of people that work in sustainable finance are so open to having conversations, especially from students, and just to help sort of drive, because you guys are, you've probably heard this so many times, but like the next generation, and like, you're gonna be so needed and so valuable with the skill sets and knowledge that you have to be able to drive this industry forward. We have a long way to go. So I do think, your input is really valuable. And then, just another tip on networking is just coming in with a view or something that, you feel you can also share. Because I think, it should be a two-way stream in terms of exchanging knowledge, and learning from each other. So never feel like, oh, you're just a student or you don't know enough, you don't have experience. Like you have a lot of knowledge, and just trust in yourself, and your abilities. And I think you can have a really productive conversation.
Hear that, folks? Trust in yourself and your abilities. That's excellent. That's amazing. Thank you so much, Lovey. So we're coming up almost to 11:10. I want to give anyone an opportunity to ask a question. This is the time. You can put it in the chat, or you can come off mute, whatever works. If there's another question that's popped into your mind. There was a question I did want to ask you. Yes, I think we see. Okay, excellent. Just to thank you there. You're very welcome. Or I guess I don't want to speak.
You're very welcome.
There you go. There you go. Okay. This is impeccable. I think you actually touched on most of the questions. Great job.
Thank you. Yeah, no, this is really great. And I've been in your shoes, and I don't think we had alumni hours when I was in my undergrad. But this is, such a great addition. And like, please do take, like full sort of leverage it, and you're going to get exposed to so many different careers within sustainability. And there's so many different paths to like really have that impact. So great job to the faculty for putting these on, and great job to all of you for attending. I think like this is really the first step. You're taking the initiative to like learn about your career and the different paths you can have.
Yeah, Awesome. Thanks, Lovey. Okay, with that being said, Lovey, was there any other thing you wanted to let people know?
Yeah, just if you want to connect, I'm on LinkedIn, and if you have any more questions, please feel free to just send me an invitation. I'm happy to chat, or a quick call as well. I generally have gotten a lot from Waterloo, and so I do want to give back as much as I can. So yeah, please feel free to reach out if you have any further questions. And yeah, thanks for the opportunity and for just listening to me go on about sustainable finance.
Of course. Awesome. That was excellent. You heard it here. So Lovey's information and her LinkedIn will be made available to folks who've attended afterwards. It's for you folks to connect with her. The session has been recorded, and so the information she shared, the resources she's mentioned, will be made available on the Alumni Office Hours website as well for you folks to reference. Keep an eye out for the survey to let us know how you found this session. But thank you all so much for coming. Lovely. I just wanted to say a huge thank you so much for giving us your time. This was incredible. I learned so much about sustainable finance myself as someone who has more of a science and comms background. So this was excellent, very eye-opening. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge.
My pleasure. Enjoy the rest of your summer, everyone.
Yes. Okay. Take care, everyone.
Bye.